As a career coach and a committee member of Women in Mining South Africa, I have the privilege of meeting really interesting people on a daily basis. My name is Bryony Lieber, and in this conversation, I'm chatting with James Campbell, the Managing Director of Botswana Diamonds PLC. James talks to me about some of the career transitions he's had. We explore a bit about what his future self might advise him on, and we talk about the value of working outside of your professional area through volunteering and taking up opportunities to solve problems in your community. James, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really lovely to see you again. I don't think I've seen you in probably 2 and a bit years, but I've definitely seen you all over LinkedIn. So I feel like we've been having a chat, even if it hasn't been a direct one, for a while.
Thank you very much indeed for having me, Brian. And I likewise follow your work, and it's very innovative in this particular space.
I think that's what I enjoy about how you show up on LinkedIn as well. You're not like the typical mining person that I seem to meet who's scared of social media and scared of putting yourself out there. I enjoy the content that you share, and I know that a lot of other people get huge value from it as well. So maybe that's where we can start, is what makes you comfortable with being so present as a person on social media and LinkedIn specifically?
Brian, I think it comes from the nature of my corporate background. When I was at De Beers, I was very involved with many things, but we had a superb public relations team there who looked after many of these kind of things. But one of the kind of jobs I did at De Beers was to lead what they called then an e-business initiative. You might remember the e-business times, where we launched an intranet, an internet, an extranet. So that kind of sensitized me to social media at the beginnings of social media. Now, fast forward 20 years, I run a junior. I'm running my 4th junior now.
Wow.
How do you separate yourself from other CEOs running juniors?
Yeah.
Not that we have many in South Africa, but if you go to the London Stock Exchange, Toronto Stock Exchange, Australia Stock Exchange, there are thousands of people like myself. So what do you got to do in addition to doing your job well? Of course, that goes without saying, because without a firm foundation, media is nothing. And the guidance I was given is you've got to be authentic, you've got to be present on social media, and it's got to be real stuff, it's got to be you. So it's as professional as I can be as a non-communications professional. But you've got to get out there and you've got to relate to your shareholders.
Yeah.
And my shareholders are people like you and I. They're ordinary people, and they want to see an ordinary bloke or lady doing their thing. So you've got to get out there. And then I think the second part to it is you've got to almost be a thought leader in your area too as well. And so I try and aspire to be a thought leader in the diamond and diamond exploration space, and to some extent in the leadership space too as well, because I've been involved with Common Purpose and a leadership development NGO for over 20 years now. So that's a real passion of mine too at the same time.
Okay, you've touched on so many things there, so I now want to kind of unbundle all of these things. I think the first thing that you've said is around having to position your expertise in your network and be a thought leader, share value into your network, differentiate yourself from everybody else. I'm really recording these videos for young professionals who are starting to kind of embrace the concept of managing themselves as a business. And one of the key points around that is you have to position yourself as somebody that people need to know.
Well, Bryony, absolutely. And I think the added part to that is, as I mentioned earlier, and I can't say strongly enough how important it is to do your job really well, but it's also to get out there and go to conference.
Yeah.
Because anybody can go to the conference, sit at the back, enjoy the drinks and the meals, and enjoy the networking, and then leave. But make a conscious effort to present or be involved in panel discussions. 2 years ago, at the Prospectors and Developers Association in Canada, which is the world's largest mining conference, the Cape Town Mining Indaba sits just actually behind it.
Yeah.
I was invited to do the keynote Following me was the chief executive of De Beers. And of course, De Beers, the
Wow.
largest diamond mining company in the world. And I'm an alumni of De Beers, but I was given the job of heading it up. And I was absolutely thrilled. So I put a huge amount of effort into the presentation. And following that presentation, it took me about half a day to walk from one end of the conference center to the other
Yeah.
because people heard the speech, the presentation, and they just wanted to engage.
Yeah.
Now, if I didn't make that presentation, many people wouldn't have come up to me. I would have been one of 10, 15,000 people just wandering the halls. So that's why it's so important to actually go and deliver something, and not necessarily about your company. I spoke about raising funds for diamond exploration in Southern Africa. It's trying to find that area where you can be a subject matter expert,
Yeah.
for want of a word. And I was at Rockwell Diamonds, which was a fairly large company by junior standards. We had about 1,000 people, but we had a dozen or more graduates. And one of the things I encouraged our graduates to do was to go out and present. And an institution, for example, like the South African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, has a young professionals conference,
Yes.
which was super. So I said to half a dozen, okay, right, 6 of you must go and present a paper, go out there, network, and write us a report when you come back.
Lovely.
And they found it quite intimidating to draft a presentation and a paper in their 20s. But once they'd done it, they suddenly realized that the door was open from a networking perspective.
Yeah.
They suddenly got more confidence. They got more greater degree of network, and they started to understand what you mentioned earlier, that the world of the personal brand, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, a lot of people won't ever get that opportunity to be the keynote speaker at a big conference, but on LinkedIn, you can be the keynote speaker every day by virtue of just sharing your content and your thoughts and your insights. And I guess the opportunity for young professionals to be seen at conferences and events is perhaps to be as volunteers, to have a role, to not just be there as participants, but to be there to help with the event, and to take an active role in the event, because it gives you a great opportunity to differentiate yourself from just being a participant. James, why the mining industry? How did you get into it? What was the prompt for it?
I think there are two parts to that, Bryony. I went to a boarding school in rural Suffolk in England, which can't be further away from mining and South Africa. And in England, you do O levels up until the age of 16, then you do A levels up until the age of 18. And I was thinking, well, I chose maths, chemistry, and geography on the basis of my enjoyment, and that I was good at it. But I thought, what am I going to do with them? What job am I going to get? So I thought, well, let me do a geology O level at the same time as doing those 3 A levels. And I really loved it. Why? Very simple. You went to very interesting places. You climbed mountains. You looked at rocks. You started to think about, the origin of man and the origin of the earth. And so I thought, no, this could be a good thing to do. I came across the Royal School of Mines, which is part of Imperial College. And at that time, we're talking about I graduated in 85. The Royal School of Mines was the preeminent mining school in the world. And in fact, South African mining companies went to the Royal School of Mines on the form of a milk run to employ a dozen geologists, a dozen metallurgists, a dozen mining engineers. So I thought, well, let me go to Royal School of Mines. And the guy asked me at the interview, why are you coming here? And I said, well, look, clearly your reputation precedes itself, but I stand the best possible chance of getting a job if I graduate and do reasonably well, of which I did. And then about a family thing, when I graduated, thankfully at that time, there were a number of different jobs going. There was an opportunity to work underground at a gold mine. There was an opportunity to work in diamond exploration. There was an opportunity to do mud logging in the North Sea. And then finally, there was an opportunity to be a quarry geologist at a roadstone company in the UK. My grandfather was the chief accountant of De Beers. So my grandfather said to me, you know what to do. You'll join De Beers. So that's what I did. I did as what my grandfather said I must.
So, James, you've come a long way since then. You're now the managing director of Botswana Diamonds PLC, and your career's taken many, many transitions along the way. Tell me a little bit about some of those transitions and what you've learnt in each of those.
No, thank you, Bernie. I'm running my fourth listed diamond company, and typically what happens in the life of a junior CEO is you either die, get fired, or you merge. And I haven't done the first two. The first one was from a transition from being an exploration geologist to being a mine geologist, and this was one of those things that I didn't think about. I was doing diamond exploration work in the then Transvaal, of course, for De Beers. And my boss came to me and said, look, there's a job going at Finch Mine to do the underground geology and resource extension work there. You will go. And I later found out that I wasn't the first choice. The first choice declined, the second choice declined, and the exploration department had to provide somebody, so I was told to go. So,
and you didn't say no?
Well, you can't, I'm not that kind of person. So I said, yes, sir, I will go. But they knew something a lot more than what I did, because this was probably one of the formative changes in my career itself. I was sent to Finch Mine, and my job was to basically do the resource work of the mine below the current mine, what Petra are currently mining some 20 years later.
Okay.
So as part of it, I was given 3 months to put together a capital application to do this work, which came in about 20 million rand. I remember it now. But I also had to develop brand new technology for underground bulk sampling, which had never been done before in kimberlites. So it was a massive technological learning curve, a financial learning curve, and I was given end-to-end responsibility from a financial perspective, a technical perspective, and a reporting perspective. And I had fantastic support from the then general manager, Robin Mills, who's now running a large American pension fund. And we often chat about those kind of times. He had faith in me. My then boss, Alex van Sale, and Bill McKechnie from De Beers too as well. But it was a tremendous learning opportunity and something that I cherish today. The second thing I'd like to share with you is when I became Nicky Oppenheimer's personal assistant. Nothing could be more different from what I've just described to this area. You are working as a kind of an operational manager in De Beers, and suddenly you are the executive chairman's personal assistant. And first one, should I say. Wow. Nicky had just become the executive chairman of De Beers. And he'd never had a personal assistant before. His father, Harry, had. And so we both looked at each other and said, how is this going to work?
What do we do?
What do we do? So, but it was a fantastic experience, 3-year experience. We got on extremely well. So much so that, I'm very blessed to still be invited to his, larger birthday celebrations and wedding anniversary celebrations and things such as that. But it really helped me to get a good understanding about navigating corporate politics and actually how genuinely to serve as well. Because Nicky is a tremendously humble man, but incredibly intuitive in the industry. And he's not demanding, but your job is to make his life easier.
Yeah.
The third one I'd like to share with you, it's a very, very interesting one. One of the jobs I had to do was become general manager of information technology. And people ask me, how on earth did a geologist who was personal assistant to De Beers get involved in IT? I said, well, it's actually quite simple. The then general manager of IT, Kevin Burford, had been promoted to a regional manager. And the board kind of looked around the table and said, well, who's going to be the next general manager? And because I was a personal assistant, I often sat, there making notes for the chairman. No, Nicky turned around to me and said, well, James knows about computers. Maybe he could do the
and what a great qualification.
Exactly. But then in all seriousness, what the finance director then said is that, well, yes, James does know computers, but he also understands the business of De Beers very well. And that's really important because we don't want a techie because they could go off the tangent. We want someone who really understands the business to align IT to the business. So I did that job, and it was a tough job, Brian. I've got to say, very different from what I've done before. And the one thing I did learn, and I must give Kevin Burford the credit for this one, the previous general manager, is about the rhythm of running a department and the routine. Because I came from an exploration background where every day is different. Yes, you have routine and rhythms and things like that, but it's quite different from running an operational IT department. So that was something that I really drew out of that was the rhythm. And the final thing I want to share with you is that when I joined De Beers, I thought I was going to be a lifer with De Beers. It was one of those. I was a general manager, and I was one of 4 people who was potentially going to stand in the shoes of the director of geology. But sadly, that actually wasn't to be. And I took voluntary redundancy. But literally, as I did, I walked straight into African Diamonds PLC and became a junior. And what I say to many people is that I learned, got my technical foundation from De Beers, terrific technical foundation. But what I've learned in the corporate space, I must ascribe a lot to my current chairman, and he's been chairman of 3 companies. I've been the managing director of Dr. John Teeling, who's a serial entrepreneur. And he taught me so much about the corporate space, about raising money. And essentially, when you're a junior company CEO, you're chief cook and bottle washer. If you don't do it, nothing happens. You don't have an HR department, IT department, finance department. You do it, or you get it arranged. And John was absolutely super in kind of shepherding me in those early days, as I may have been a bit lost. And so much so that, as I said, almost 20 years later, I'm now running my 3rd company under him. And we're still going strong together, which is wonderful.
Oh, well, congratulations. I mean, James, that is such a journey. And the things that I take out of that is the value you've had in working in kind of every aspect of the business, essentially. And I've heard you at a number of different workshops and seminars for young professionals, talking about the value of working in a junior mine and the need for professionals to understand how businesses run and to have kind of touch points across the full business, not to limit themselves to just being their kind of geology profession, but actively understanding the bigger business. And that's always really struck me as very valuable advice. There's a mindset around, I have a geology qualification, I am a geologist, I can only look for a job in geology. The geology opportunities at the moment are really quite limited. We see a huge number of graduates coming out of university and not being absorbed into the economy. And so I guess I want to explore a little bit about your advice for these young geology graduates and how to make themselves valuable in the world of work and get some exposure to a much wider set of experiences.
Ryan, it's a very good question. And I formally mentor people through the Geological Society. I informally mentor people. I have 4 daughters of my own. So I kind of work through that journey with them and with mentors. I think, Brian, there's a few things that I suggest. Of course, be good at your job. Do well in your job. And that goes without saying. That's your rock. That's your foundation with which to build a career. Secondly, is get out there and network, present at conferences. Thirdly, and really important, find your own personal competitive advantage. Yes, I mentioned earlier, yes, there are thousands of junior CEOs. So I have a pool I must compete with because there's only a limited amount of money that goes in. You've just mentioned now there are many less jobs for geologists as there are geologists. So how do you find your competitive advantage? It's in geology. It's got to be in geology to begin with. But geology has many, many, many different aspects attached to it. There's different minerals, there's exploration, there's mining, there's evaluation, there's academia, there's support services, all sorts of different things. Find your niche actually in it.
Yeah.
The fourth thing I suggest is, and this doesn't go down very well with many of the youngsters, sadly, you've got to spend 10 years in the field.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the field or on the mines. There's absolutely no substitute to that field experience. And I'll just share with you a little anecdote. I hosted the honours students of a well-known university at one of my project sites about 2 years ago. And it was a very, very hot day. It must have been about 40 degrees centigrade, and we're going up and down hills. And this is what I do. And a couple of the young ladies grabbed me at the end and said, Mr. Campbell, we don't want to do what you're doing at your age. I looked at them and I said, but what do you want to do? I said, no, we want to be consultants and, work in the city. I said, let me be very honest with you. I would never use somebody like yourself because you have absolutely zero experience. The consultants I use are people who have very deep operational experience and very deep consulting experience. So they've actually got the two together. I said, the penultimate thing I would like to say is that you've actually got to go out and read and do courses and do things which are supplementary, which means you might have to work many, many hours in the day. I did an MBA through distance learning. It took me 4.5 years. And I was determined that MBA had the same level of qualification as a full-time one, because many people say it isn't. So I did it through one of the best universities in the UK, and it was tough. I wrote my thesis in a tent in Botswana whilst I was building a mine.
Wow.
But, it was tough. So I say to people, you've got to do those things. And the final thing, and I think this grounds you terrifically, and I take this very much from my old background at De Beers and Harry and Nikki Oppenheimer and things like that, where they said, we don't just want leaders in our organization because we've given them the title of general manager or director. We want you to be leaders in society too as well. And that was one of the things that kind of got me involved with Common Purpose, because their initial strapline was leadership beyond authority. So go there where you actually have no authority, but you're actually still a leader. So I say to many, go out and give back to society. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's working in a soup kitchen, working at the SPCA with the dogs, doing the kind of stuff that I do at director level. It doesn't matter, but go back and give back, because that'll ground you, and it'll also give you many, many soft skills that you might not get actually in the work environment.
Connects you to people that you might never be connected to otherwise. It gives you perspective that you might not have otherwise. And I certainly think definitely the benefit of being involved in things outside of yourself is it's sometimes where our meaning and purpose comes from ultimately. And I think there's the majority of people that I speak to who have a deep sense of meaning are people who are about serving others.
Yes, I just want to maybe develop one thing about working outside of your own area as well. I think that's actually quite important. I want to develop that just kind of momentarily. Is that, yes, if you're a young geologist doing their thing, and helping out in charities and social events, that's exactly what you should be doing. But as you progress in your career and you become more in an executive role, you should try and take leadership roles in civil society. And one of the things that we are very blessed with in South Africa, many negatives, but some of the positives, we have a free press, dynamic free press, and we have a very, very strong civil society. And I think those two are almost the saving graces of the country too as well. And two of the jobs that I've had outside of my geology working environment are the chairman of Common Purpose, which is a leadership development organization. And I was chairman, and I think twice during that time, interim managing director of the Joburg Ballet and the South African Ballet Theatre. And no, I know very little about ballet. I am not a ballet dancer.
That was not going to be my question.
No, don't ask. I've got two left feet. But the skills you've honed in running a cash-strapped NGO, the skills you've learned in terms of understanding the core value drivers of a business. Not a lovely, consultant 50-page PowerPoint deck, but the real things which run the business actually stand you in very good stead in doing these other kind of things. And so you can use those talents not just to do the very important work which many of these MPOs do, but also take on a leadership role and help guide these MPOs, which are part of the fundamental fabric of society in this country. And one of the things I say to my kids and to people I mentor, that you are blessed to have a degree and a job and all those kind of good things, but it's not just giving money back to the poor and needy, which you must do anyway. But, God gave you those talents, so go back and use those talents outside of your own work for the good of society. Otherwise, you need to be a full member of society, and that kind of creates you as a more kind of whole person. I think I wanted to kind of just touch on that.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful point. And certainly living in South Africa, we have no shortage of opportunities where our talents can be explored and given and add value outside of our kind of core work environments. And as a volunteer to Women in Mining South Africa, I certainly believe that there are talents that I had never explored before that I'm now getting an opportunity to use and hopefully adding value along the way. I think for a young professional, if you're not getting the opportunity to demonstrate your leadership in your profession, volunteering and working outside of your profession is the best possible way to gain leadership experience and ultimately to be able to bring that back into your profession and demonstrate that you do have those skills for the next position that you're looking at. So absolutely, it's for me, it's two-pronged. It's gain experience that you're not gaining in your workplace, potentially, as well as give that experience for the benefit of broader society.
Absolutely, Brad. I just want to build on that momentarily is that one of the things that we did in Common Purpose 2 years ago is, of course, we have a good blend of male and female. We have a good blend of the demographics. But where we were weak is we did not have a good blend in ages. So we decided to take on 2, but we've ended up with 3 young directors who've never been a director before.
Oh, lovely.
Because often when these jobs say if you're going to be a director, you must have previous director experience.
How do you
now,
get
where
it?
on earth are you going to get that from?
Exactly.
So we took on 3. One was late 20s, and the other was 2 of them, I think, early 30s. So we took on 3 young directors. And it's been terrific, the perspective they've had. So that diversity, people often equate diversity in this country first to color, then to being male or female. But it's also about age.
Yeah.
But it's good because we've got myself in my late 50s, we've got people in their 40s, people in their 30s, and someone in their 20s. And I think that's so important because these youngsters add a terrific value, add a different perspective.
Completely.
But for them also, they are now getting experience as a director. So when they apply for another job, they can say, actually, I've been a director for 2 years already in this company.
Yeah.
So at least it kind of gets them onto the treadmill. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be a director of a company at that age as well.
A lot of what you're talking about is what I call managing your career like a business and recognizing that you have to be responsible for your own raw materials, and your raw materials are your experience, your knowledge, your skills, your aptitude, and your behaviors. And you have to constantly be working on those in each kind of step that you take in your career. You have to be your own marketing manager. You have to be your own salesperson. You have to be constantly networking and surrounding yourself with what I call your personal board of directors. So people who are advising and guiding and encouraging you, and intentionally doing everything you can to make you known, not waiting for a company to develop you or give you opportunities.
Bryony, no, I can't agree with you more. And I was very fortunate at De Beers to go through their career planning process, and they were very good with that. But if I quickly saw that if you just allow the process to take place and you were reactive to it, then you did not necessarily get the better opportunities.
Yeah.
Whereas if you managed the process yourself, took ownership of it, which after all, they wanted you to do anyway.
Exactly.
They were just providing the framework for you. And the same comes today, and the psychometric tools and the courses and those kind of things. But you had to kind of, without kind of putting yourself too forward, but you had to have a fairly clear plan yourself about what you wanted to do, but at the same time you had to leave room for opportunity as well. So you had to be opportunistic at the same time as having a thorough plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Courage, compassion, and curiosity. How have those come up in your career?
I think I'd like to share possibly maybe I've got a couple of stories I'd like to share with you, but maybe one in particular, and maybe drill into that because it was one which was terrifically difficult for me, and it required a great deal of support from other people, and it ended up quite well at the same time. Where I was, this was several years ago, I was managing director of African Diamonds PLC, and we were in joint venture with De Beers on a project of which I was the project manager at De Beers. And I was running the bulk sampling program at De Beers, and then I took retrenchment and joined African Diamonds as the managing director. And as mining projects go, because this was a good project, we applied for a mining license in Botswana. And the government approved the mining license, but with marketing being done on open tender. Now, marketing on open tender for De Beers is an anathema, or it certainly was at that particular point in time. So De Beers said, no, we're not going ahead with this thing. We are going to apply for basically a license to basically stop the mine from proceeding, and it's no longer economic. And of course, what that would have meant for African Diamonds is the end of African Diamonds, but more importantly, we fundamentally believed in the value of the project, and our shareholders fundamentally believed in the value of the project. So we negotiated to very, very long in the day with De Beers to basically not apply for this particular license, a retention license. That was it.
Okay.
And I remember a board meeting. I still remember it as clear as today. It was at the top of the Grand Palm in Gaborone. And I was there with my country manager, who's the ex-mining commissioner, and he's going to come up in a moment, of Botswana. There was my Irish board on the end and saying, James, you've got to press the button and launch a high court action against De Beers. And I was personally very, very stressed about this because I had a lovely career at De Beers. I had many friends there. I valued them enormously. But at the same time, I understood my role as managing director of African Diamonds. And my country manager, a gentleman by the name of Ribson Kabanoe, who I'm still great friends with now, he could see me wrestling and battling emotionally with this. And he was a man of very, very few words. So he just said, I think we need a comfort break. And so he went outside and said, James, just come over here a moment. And he's a man of very few words. Said, James, I just want to share a couple of things with you. Firstly, we as Botswana shareholders back you fully in whatever decision you make. That's the first thing. Secondly, you've got to remember that the De Beers you're currently battling with at the moment is not the De Beers you joined and had such a wonderful career with. Thirdly, you've got to be very clear in your own mind who you currently serve. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but let me leave you with those three things and go back into the meeting. Went back into the meeting, I said, yes, I know what I've actually got to do. So the following morning, it was the Botswana Resource Sector Conference, and I was second up after the minister. And my presentation was from 7:45 to 8:15 in the morning, and it was in the UK summer. So we had a press release going out at 7 o'clock in the morning, UK time, 8 o'clock in the morning, Botswana time. So I started up my presentation as I normally did, blah, 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 blah. And at 8 o'clock on the dot, I put my presentation down and said, I'm now stopping my presentation. I'm reading this press release. Wow. About African Diamonds launching a high court action against De Beers. And of course, the room went into a cacophony because this was a David versus Goliath situation. But the long and the short of that was that urgency was granted. A new mining license was awarded, but with De Beers doing the marketing. So there's a lot of negotiation actually in there. And just look at the Karowe mine today. Yeah. It produced dividends in its second year of operation. All the technical stuff which we said would happen has actually happened. But, you know, there was times like in the Sunday Times, I've actually got it framed here on my wall here, where I'm called a traitor. Front page Sunday Times, I'm called a traitor. And it was incredibly tough. Yeah. You know, many of my old colleagues and friends wouldn't talk to me because of what I was doing. And even my doctor, who I went to see because I was very stressed, he says, James, you're the only person in the world who thinks this is going to end up well for you. Don't you think you want to listen to some of those other people? And I thought, well, I've listened to people like Ribson. I listened to people like Alex van Zyl. I listened to my chairman and my board. I listened to the ordinary shareholder in Botswana, very importantly. And then I realized what I actually had to do. But it was damn tough. Yeah. But that, to me, is probably one of the biggest stories for my personal self about having the courage to kind of go to court to do these things and having the courage of my convictions that, yes, this would work out to be a good mine at the end of the day. So it was enormously tough, Bryony, but that was one of the things that actually set my career. Yeah. To be very honest as well, because, you know, you're just another ex-general manager from De Beers. What would you know? An ex-general manager from a corporate. Unless you are tried and tested in the junior space. And this was a baptism of fire. I don't know if my career would have ended up in the way it has at the moment if I wasn't actually given that opportunity or that test, for want of a better word.
Well, and if you hadn't stood up to that test as well. And I think I speak to a lot of clients who say, I'm going to go around that. It's too hard. It's too scary. I'm not brave enough. And I think some of the hardest things we ever have to do, we do with fear, but we do them anyway. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but sometimes you just have to summon all of your courage because you know it's the right thing to do, not because it's the easy thing to do. And I think that's the big difference between, well, to me, it's a huge differentiator.
It is, and many people would have taken I think the back seat possibly on this, but I was very fortunate. And you spoke about a personal board of directors. I had a wonderful board. All the directors, with the exception of Alex, are still the same board I have now with Botswana Diamonds, which is wonderful. But I also had a very valuable local council who would actually, and the Botswana people are lovely in that way, in that they tend to be quite quiet, but they tend to be very wise as well. So when they say something, you have to listen especially clearly. And the third thing they do is they take a long-term view on things as well, which is contrary to many, many people. And so when you put that kind of blend together, it's a very potent mix. So when someone like Ribson said those things to me, it made a profound impact.
Yeah, it's just listening to you saying those words felt quite profound. If you were to cast your mind forward 20 years, James Campbell in 20 years' time, what is the advice you think 20 years into the future version of you would give yourself today?
I think the first thing is perhaps be a little less conservative than I am. Some people say that, oh, you're running a junior, you can't be very conservative. But I think it's by your own standards you measure that conservatism. Certainly, my risk appetite compared to a person in a corporate background will be much greater. And I've learned to develop that significantly actually over time. But perhaps maybe just being a little less conservative from time to time. And I think the second thing, which is a very difficult thing for me because by nature, I am a contingency planner. And I've always been a contingency planner that if this doesn't work out, there is this. If that doesn't work out, there is that. And it's not just in the portfolio of projects that Botswana Diamonds runs, which you have to have, by the way. You have to have that contingency planning approach in my work. But I have it in my life, having a bit of money here and a bit of money there, a bit of money over there. And, because of the political uncertainty and things like that. And I think the positive side of that is you're very well prepared. Sure. You've always got backup plans. They're always contingency plans. But there's always a flip side to that. And the flip side of that is perhaps you need to embrace the now more than I would possibly do. So perhaps I would give myself the advice is maybe the balance isn't 100% right. Maybe you could do a little less contingency planning, trying very hard to do that. The last year, I took a trip up, a camping trip, 5-week camping trip up through Botswana, Zambia, and Tanzania. Lovely. And my wife would try to persuade me to do this. And I said, oh, I don't know if I can take 5 weeks off. Gosh, goodness me. No, that just won't work. I've got so much work to do. And eventually she persuaded me that, James, you're not getting any younger. You're physically very able and it's going to be physically demanding. And she said, well, why don't you just ask your chairman? And my chairman said, well, why not? If you can just carry on getting the base work done whilst you're traveling, do it. And of course I did. And it was the most terrific opportunity. I got all of my work done at the same time. So when I arrived at a place, I got my work done. But I was able to experience, the beauties of the Serengeti, the Ngorongoro crater, the ocean in Tanzania. And we camped for 5 weeks. And I thought, yes, I wouldn't have done that if someone hadn't have pushed me of doing it.
It says to me, perhaps your contingency planning is not such a bad thing, because with all of that, I'm sure you have plans in place to make sure that you can holiday and still keep the business running. And the second lesson for me is how often people don't do things because they assume they already know what the answer is going to be. And so they don't ask, can I do this? In anticipation of the answer being yes. They avoid asking in anticipation of the answer being no. And the answer will always be no when you don't ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got to kind of press those boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. This has been really good. I really appreciate your time. You've kind of raised some really important things for young people and kind of more experienced people as well to be thinking about. So thanks for taking the time to think through some of the questions and have a great conversation.
Okay, 100%. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Take care.